part of the stigma and the taboo and the stereotypes that we suffer comes from that putting us in a corner, making us all feel like because we don't have children, all of us are then this one thing, whether it's the selfish, the immature, the unnatural, they're not feminine enough, not complete. You can choose any of the horrible words that they choose to talk about us. A lot of that othering and that cornering comes from people thinking we are all the same. So to then break the corner, take us out of that corner, I wanted to show how different we are.
Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. I have to say, one of the very coolest things is when someone you know writes a book, when they have spent quite literally years of their life creating this masterpiece. And of course, you hope it will be a masterpiece because there's nothing worse than someone saying, I wrote a book and you not liking it, which PS is definitely not the case with today's guest. But seeing someone bring forth this work that they have created and everything that's gone into it, and then seeing it become a success and be welcomed in the world with open arms, it is just so wonderful to witness. And I have to say, as an aspiring author, it's also very inspiring to me. Today's guest is Nicole Louie. She's somebody I connected with over on Instagram probably a couple of years ago now. And she is a writer and translator based in Ireland. And she is author of the brand new book, Others Like Me, which is the story of 14 women around the world from different walks of life who don't have children. Others Like Me is also the story of why Nicole Louie had to find them and what they taught her. Part memoir, part exploration of childlessness through candid conversations, this book showcases the many ways in which people find fulfillment outside of parenthood. Today, we're going to be talking to Nicole all about her book, all about her own child-free journey. And I know that you're going to love everything that she shares with us. And I know you're going to want to get your hands on a copy of the book, Others Like Me. Nicole, I'm so happy to have you on to talk about your book today because I am like a big fan of your writing and your work. We've been connected on Instagram for quite some time now, and I was fortunate enough to get an advance copy of your book, which we're going to talk about in a second. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I just want to say you are such an exquisite writer. The format is something I haven't seen done too often, so I'm curious to talk about that. And I have to say, while I appreciated all of the stories of the women that you interview in the book, I most loved hearing about your own experience. And you tell it so beautifully. So all I can say, and it's not going to be the first time I'm going to say it in today's conversation, but people have to get their hands on a copy of Others Like Me. So with that being said, Nicole, tell us a little bit about yourself. And then I would love to hear about this wonderful book you've written.
Thank you so much. That's very, very generous. I really appreciate it. About me, I'm a writer. I was born in Brazil. I'm a translator, which takes me all over the world. And I am currently based in Ireland. I became Irish last week. So now I'm...
Congrats!
Thank you. Yeah. So
how exciting.
I have to do the leprechaun dances and learn how to do. I love Ireland as my heart's country, the place I chose to call home. And I wrote this book called Others Like Me that came out last week. And I'm very happy that it's out in the world. It's wonderful to hear the reception. Still early days. But yeah, very, very happy with all that is happening so far.
Wonderful. Well, I'm thrilled, but not surprised to hear that the reception has been so positive. I know for people listening to the audio, I'm basically making her blush, but it's all true. I don't hand out big praise for no reason. I know this has been a labor of love. You and I have spoken previously. This book has been so much more than a project, like really just like a labor of love for you over the last 14 years, is it?
Yes, 14 years.
Yeah, so just incredible to have it come to fruition, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay, so as we do with all of our guests, first and foremost, I want to talk about you. We're going to talk a lot about the book, but I'm curious to know, now you are child-free by choice. Is that something you had to navigate to, make this decision? Tell us about how you arrived at the decision not to have kids.
Well, that's the whole 250 pages of the book.
I was going to say the brief part, read the book if you want the full story. Yeah.
Well, I guess the short version of it is I truly knew that I didn't want to become a mother from a really, really early age. There was never much doubt that, which is why I don't use the word ambivalence in relation to my own story often, because I didn't feel like it truly reflected what I was going through. I think what the big part of my story is about is not so much do I want to become a mother or not, but more why don't I want to become a mother? I think that was a question that stayed the longest with me. And that wasn't necessarily because I felt that I needed a reason. I think not wanting a child is reason enough to not become a mother. But I wasn't hearing voices around me that allowed me to say it in the way I'm saying now, and that is enough. It always felt as if not wanting is not a reason for you not to do it. And I think when you are a child, a teenager, a young woman, it's much harder for you to listen to your own voice because, first of all, you're still being shaped, you're still figuring out who you are. And I think the confidence wasn't really there. So the book is the part of the book that is about me, which is about 40%, 50%, is very much me trying to shut down the other voices that were questioning my knowing and turning the volume of my own voice up to try and balance that and learn to listen to myself, to trust that I was asking myself all the questions. I was trying to figure it all out. I was doing the work. So why not trust what the answers were? And the answer was always no for me, really. And I think the second aspect was I knew it was a no, but it didn't mean that it was a comfortable no, or that I wasn't scared, or that I wasn't afraid of what that life could look like, because there was nobody else to tell me that it would be a good life. I kept questioning, do I really want to go there? What if it's going to be terrible? And I didn't really know anybody who was having a terrible life not doing it. I just didn't know anybody who wasn't doing it. So that's where the other voices, the positive voices, also came into play. In a way, I really feel like the book was mostly me trying to shut down the voices that were not helpful and bringing to my life the voices that I thought would bring some more balance to that equation, and then deciding in the end, after hearing all the voices, what I really want to do.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting what you share, because although I guess, I shouldn't say I guess, I characterize myself as having been previously ambivalent and having been on the fence. I think part of what caused that ambivalence was this mistrust of my own voice, my own innate desires, which, largely speaking, were that this just doesn't appeal to me. It's just not something that I want. And if anything, my movement towards, making this decision, becoming confident in my child-free choice, more than connecting with what I wanted, it was like honoring what I wanted and actually listening to that. And so what you share really resonates with me, although our stories are different, certainly. I found a lot of comfort and solace in what you share in the book and what you shared just now. And I think this is such a big part for everyone listening, regardless of if you're like 50-50 on the fence, part of you wants kids, part of you doesn't, to recognize that it is about, as you said it so perfectly, turning up the volume on your own, voice and inner knowledge and wisdom, and turning down the dial on everything and everyone else, which is so hard because we live in a world that we're inevitably going to be impacted by others around us. And although you wanted to turn some of those other voices down, I like how you also were like, well, yeah, I am going to be influenced in some sense by others. So let's be selective about who I'm listening to, whose stories I'm paying attention to, whose voices act as a guide for me. And so I'd love if you, for people who aren't familiar with the book, can you just talk a little bit about sort of like the format and who the others like me are, broadly speaking, that you talk to or talk about in this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is a hybrid of memoir and anthology of other people's stories. And that was a format that I really fought hard to keep. When I started doing research on childlessness in 2010, there were already quite a few books. There are many books on the topic, but they were either or scenarios. They would be maybe memoirs, and then you stay with the voice the whole book, which is a perfectly fine format. But I wanted more than my own voice. I already knew what I wanted. So I didn't want it to be cathartic. I didn't want it to be, here's my story. This is how I feel. Hope this is helpful. Bye. It was more, I know what I want, but I'm still in doubt. So can I maybe talk to other people? And then it was a matter of how do I bring these other voices? I could have gone only through to the anthology format, which I considered for a while. But after I read some of those books, I really missed like a thread that makes you want to stay with the book. And then another thing that was also very conscious was it's not only about you staying with the book until the end, but while I met the women, I wanted to continue to ask myself questions. I wanted to give myself that space on the page because obviously I changed as a person. I started this book when I was in my late 20s and now I'm in my 40s. So I'm not the same person. And I wanted to make space for that reflection and for that change in the book, which then meant then you have to insert yourself in it because you might not be able to ask the women 10 years from now, do you still feel like that? But I could ask myself 10 years ago, I felt this way. How do I feel now? So the book then tells my story. The first section, there are 3 sections in the book. The first section is called Looking Back. And it's basically me reflecting on things that I believe that really shaped my early decision to not become a mother. Then looking at others is me inviting women who don't have children for whatever reason to talk to me about their circumstance or their decision or their ambivalence. All the voices were welcome, and that was the point of the book. The other voices could be any other voices, really. There were no parameters to that. And the third section is, right, I looked back, I spoke to others, what now? And the third section is called Looking Ahead. So then the book is called Others Like Me, The Lives of Women Without Children.
I as I said earlier in our conversation, like I really appreciated this format because it's something I haven't really seen before. And I love how you do have sort of, as we say in German, the red thread. We say it in German, but we'll do the English version. I won't test my German today. The red thread that carries this all or ties it all together. And I think it also, your part of the story, it kind of serves as a model for people to be able to also reflect on their own, right? Because sometimes we read or hear about other people's stories, whether it's strictly in memoir format or whether it's in that anthology format that you mentioned, and we think, oh, that's interesting, or I can relate to that. But I like how you really show how your own journey kind of ran alongside that, and the questions that you ask yourself and how it evolves. Because again, I think that serves to help people see how they might be able to do that for themselves when they are asking those questions or when they're reading the book, I should say. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. You talk about like you knew what you wanted and you still had doubts. And I'm sorry that that's the case for a lot of child-free women, but I appreciate it for this reason. And that is when I was on the fence, all I saw around me and there were very few of them, but child-free women that I saw out there in the greater world or that I started reading about online or whose Instagram account I followed, they seem to have always this unwavering certainty that for me, through my ambivalence and being on the fence into either even greater sort of contrast, if you will, and made me feel so much more other. Like I was like, not only like I don't fit as a mother and I don't fit either as a child-free person because I have desire for both things. And so the fact that you share that, and I know this isn't the case for everyone who's child-free, but that there still can be challenges and doubts and struggles that accompany this child-free path. For some reason, it brought comfort to me. And I think hopefully will bring comfort to people who are on the fence who are listening to know that even those people who are sure, who feel like this is really something innate, if you will, or this is a path they've always felt called to, the child-free path, that it's not necessarily easy for them either. Because we can feel so lonely when we think it's just me who's struggling because I'm in this gray zone in between. And so I'm wondering, can you speak specifically to what some of those struggles and challenges were that didn't just make this clear cut, like, okay, I don't want to have kids, end of story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess one thing that is important to me to clarify, I never really woke up any day and thought, oh, today is the day that I want a child. So it didn't fluctuate in that sense. I never went from not wanting to wanting, even for a second or for a moment.
Yeah.
I think so it wasn't so much that I wasn't certain, I was always certain. The discomfort came from not being able to visualize that life in the future. Because then I'm going, what about later on? What does my life look like?
Yeah.
And am I still comfortable with what that life can look like? And that's when fear would creep in. Another aspect is I do love children. I know there are many people who don't want to have children, who don't feel comfortable around children, who don't like them, or just don't know how to interact with them. And it's absolutely fine and valid. It's their reality, but it's not mine. And I'm the kind of person who, if I see a baby, I go get the baby. So oftentimes,
I'm the same. Especially babies. Kids, I sometimes struggle. Babies, I'm like, oh my God, let me hold it.
Can I have your baby?
Please, I'll be back later.
Exactly. And I made a point of mentioning this in the book, not as a way of saying, hey, I'm likable. Look, I'm the nice girl who likes kids. No, that wasn't that. It is because it's truly a big thing in my life. I do like children. I know how to play with them. I know how to interact with them. I want to write books for children, for example. I care about them. So sometimes that became quite confusing for me, especially when I would again hear the voices, you would be a great mom. Are you sure you don't want a mom, but you're so good with kids? And decoupling that, making sure that I would continue to separate those two things, my ability to be with kids, my curiosity about their world, both from a creative perspective and as a human, didn't equate to motherhood or to wanting to be a mother. And then there is a whole chapter in the book about all the people who support parents, the teachers, the child minders, the doctors who specialize in children, the babysitters, social workers, and they don't have to have a child to be able to be good at the work that they do. So a lot of my confusion and bad days came from that, from all of these layers of assumptions about my personality, and that then meaning something, that meaning motherhood, but this, then motherhood, but that, then motherhood, and then I'm constantly having to go, but those are separate things. This is not the same thing. And again, I don't want to. How can I be a good mom if I don't want to be a mom? Doesn't matter how good I am with babies. I have to want to have that baby for that to be a good experience for that baby and for me, because it's a very different thing to get somebody's baby for an hour or two on your lap when you're you're not tired, you're willing to spend time with the baby. Another thing is to bring that child into your life when you don't truly want the experience. So that was tiring, that was confusing, and not having older women to talk to, that was, I think, one of the biggest gaps in my life. Not just any person, but somebody who could say, I'm in my 60s, I'm in my 70s, I can look back and tell you what already happened. That was something that was missing, and that added to the perceived emptiness that I was seeing in the lives of women who don't have children. So until I spoke with them and understood that there were many other ways to fill in those gaps, I felt that was a confusion or an uncertainty, but it wasn't really. It was just a gap in my knowledge. And again, learning the language to talk about ambivalence or even certainty without it being smooth all the way was something also that I had to learn. The fact that I am not completely confident or comfortable with my decision doesn't mean that it's not a decision. It's still a decision. It's just that I'm not comfortable with it. It's like going through surgery. It's something that is important for your health. You understand you have to go through it, but it doesn't mean that you're like, yay, surgery. You know,
Yeah.
you're like, you're still afraid, you're still uncomfortable, you're still trying to check all the boxes, make sure you're doing everything right. So for me, it was a bit like that. I wasn't fully comfortable, but I knew it was what I wanted to do and what I needed to do in a way.
Yeah. I'm never going to forget that analogy, by the way. Thank you for that. and as someone who had to have my first, I won't say major surgery, but like a proper surgery a couple of years ago, and I was very afraid for it. It was similar. I knew this is something I wanted to do, I needed to do, but it required a lot of mental, emotional preparation for it. And it wasn't just like, giddy up, let's go, cut me open.
No. For some people it is, right? Some people do have that I never felt uncomfortable, I never felt any insecurity.
Yeah.
There are people like that in the book, and it was wonderful for me, to be honest, to hear that. And I think two of them, Lucy is one of them. She says at some point, with her very peculiar humor, she says something, I'm starting to feel like my life was a breeze now that I realize nobody ever made me think this way or ask me those questions. So during the interview, some of them realized that that is not the experience of other women, that not everybody had it that easy. Well, obviously it's not fully, but just not, they were able to stay in their head and make that decision without so many people pressuring or themselves giving them a hard time. Because in my case, to be honest, it was mostly me. Like my parents were not giving me a hard time. It was just like me being a bit of a, you need to make sure this is the right thing for you, Nicole, all the way, all the time. And I was my own demon sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, while there certainly is commentary from other people, and I don't want to dismiss the fact there are very real pressures that people face, and whether it's, please give me grandchildren, you have to do this, or, employer comments or friends comments. I think, and it's a good thing we have awareness of some of these pressures and some of the questions and commentary that people face. But I think a lot of that has become sort of internalized such that we then put those judgments upon ourselves, right? Like I remember being like, I'm so unfeminine, I'm unwomanly. And I think that's like a greater sort of, in some sense, pervasive attitude, not amongst everyone, but I'm like, where did this come from? Because nobody had ever told me you're not womanly because you don't want to have a child, or that makes you unfeminine. And it was interesting to me because femininity, as we, might see it, it wasn't even a value I held near and dear. So I almost, it was kind of like I internally like weaponized these broader ideas against myself, but it wasn't coming from any one specific person or place. It was just like, I turned these ideas inwards. It's hard to articulate. I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
You actually are. No, you are.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, good. So yeah. And even us having this conversation, like I appreciate your clarification that you're like, well, I didn't have doubts around the decision, but I still had a lack of certainty or discomfort with the idea of like, what will life look like? And it's and also you saying there are some child-free women, and some of them may be listening. It's probably not the majority audience, but they've always had this. It's just been like, they never look back. It's just what they did. And I've spoken to and know people like that. But again, like, and this is why it's so important that you told these 14 different stories, is that we're not a monolith when we look at us as women without kids, let's say. There are so many variables, and there's varying levels of comfort or discomfort or struggle or ease. And I think it's important we're aware of nuance, because I think it's something really lacking from this conversation. Both the kids are child-free decision, but even within the child-free space, if you will, everything is kind of painted with the same broad brush a lot of times. And we're also different from each other. Can you speak to that in terms of how you made these selections for the book, in terms of who to talk to? And would it be for some of the reasons I shared, or maybe you can speak to why you decided to speak with such various voices, people?
Yeah, for me, when we separate uncertainty from discomfort, part of that nuance starts to show. I think not wanting if you want a child or not is different than knowing and not feeling comfortable with that, at which point I thought, then why don't I go figure out what are the things that are making me scared? And that led me to certain types of stories. When I felt that I don't feel ambivalent, but I want to hear about ambivalence, I would go after some ambivalence story. In days where I felt more confident in my choice, I would try and find a child-free woman. In days where I felt what it would be like not to be able to make this choice, then so there is a reason why it took so long. I did go through the whole spectrum myself in my own way. Later in the book, there are infertility issues that are raised that I potentially would be infertile, and I chose not to explore them and to go deeper into them or even hear about them, because by then I was so sure I didn't want a child that it didn't really matter to me. I didn't want that to be another element to think about. But even just hearing, you might not be able to have a child anymore because you now have this condition, made me feel for a couple of days, oh, so now I'm also childless. Like, now maybe if I want to, now I can't. So it was the craziest thing to kind of go through the whole spectrum in 10 years, sometimes for staying in one phase for years, or just considering it, just modeling in my head, just wondering. But two things about the book that were important. The first was the structure, like we spoke about. And the second thing was, how do I don't reinforce walls that already exist in our community or in our communities of women without children? Not to say that I don't have respect or I don't see the use for the words that are used, the child-free and the childless. I understand why they're there. I understand that they can give comfort to people, and I think it's absolutely valid to use it when people feel the need to use them. I no longer feel the need to hold on to those words so tightly, which is why the subtitle of the book is Lives of Women Without Children, and not Lives of Child-Free Women or Lives of Childless Women, Lives of Child-Free and Childless Women. I could have put words in there. For me, it was very important that as much as possible, even knowing that it's just a sample in the end, that I could really bring the spectrum in, because part of the stigma and the taboo and the stereotypes that we suffer comes from that putting us in a corner, making us all feel like because we don't have children, all of us are then this one thing, whether it's the selfish, the immature, the unnatural, they're not feminine enough, not complete. You can choose any of the horrible words that they choose to talk about us. A lot of that othering and that cornering comes from people thinking we are all the same. So to then break the corner, take us out of that corner, I wanted to show how different we are. And that then meant going after people who could tell very different stories. For a while in the first years, I was, I think, much more in a journey of validating my own child freeness. I was more attached to the word. I was very attached to the choice. And I was like, do you not have kids? And is it because you chose? Then I want to talk to you. I think I was more direct about it. After a while, I would just ask, do you know anybody who doesn't have children? And if somebody then said, yes, can I have our contact, or can you put us in contact? I stopped asking why after a couple of years into the research, because it didn't matter to me anymore. And I also felt that if we are asking people to open their minds to us, I wasn't being open-minded enough in my own early days research and putting the women through this channel where not only you don't have children, but you have to choose not to have children for it to be in my book. I'm like, really, is it the best way for the scope of my research? I'm not saying that for other people, if that's the contribution they want to bring to the world, is absolutely fine. But people have a mission, a goal, an angle. And for my book, that angle started feeling like another corner. So I would just ask everywhere, anyone, do you know anybody who doesn't have children? Does your wife have children? And then would always get in contact. After year 3, something very funny or serendipitous started happening, which was one woman suddenly leading me to the other, and I no longer had to look for them. There was just a snowballing effect. And you notice that in the introduction, somebody gave me a phone number at the end of the interview. Somebody said, here's an email. And I didn't have to look for them anymore. So I interviewed 33 women.
Okay.
The book has 14. So a lot of the material is not there, unfortunately. It's just a matter of space and amount of pages. And then I chose first based on maps, on theming. Like I have this spreadsheet with each interview and subtopics. So if you spoke about adoption, if you spoke about infertility, if you spoke about divorce or sexual harassment, that are the major topics there. So I mapped them by topics and then tried then to, well, there are 3 people who are talking about adoption, which topic or which story went deeper into this topic. And then it was just a matter of curating and selecting, which then brought us to the 14 women. And also the ratio that are child-free women, childless women, and ambivalent women. I wanted to bring that combination.
Okay, if you have been spending the last several months or maybe years making pros and cons lists, trying to figure out whether you want to have kids or stay child-free, I'm going to encourage you to stop right there and to do something different instead. And that is to check out one of our upcoming kids or child-free online workshops. These are 2-hour online workshops hosted in the company of like-minded women, where I'm going to give you some of the actual tools and resources that I personally use to help make my kids or child-free decision. You're going to walk away from this workshop with a workbook that you can go through on your own time. And I can tell you that these 2 hours together are going to give you so much more clarity and direction in terms of the right choice for you. Find all the details on an upcoming Kids or Child-Free workshop over at kidsorchildfree.com or in the show notes of this episode. It's so interesting because I think all of the behind the scenes work, obviously the final impression is one that it is broad and it touches different kinds of stories in different women's lives. But I couldn't have told you any of those facts. This many were this many were this. One thing I read and I thought, I did not notice this. Are they all 14 different countries? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So from the 33 that I interviewed, they were from 25 countries. So that was the material I work with. And then in the end, it was brought down to 14. Yeah. So there are different how do you say that, classifiers in a way. It's nationality that are 14, the different spectrums, where they are in the spectrum of childlessness, how they moved from one to the other. And that was also very beautiful and important to see. Kay, for example, who lives in Canada, said very clearly, I'm both child-free and childless because it's both because I'm visually impaired, but also I'm choosing within my impairment to not have a child for other reasons that have nothing to do with my disability. And that was a different perspective for me, because it was so easy to think, oh, it's because she's disabled and it's just my own bias getting there, me not knowing enough people in that situation. And she said, no, because I'm blind, but I'm fertile. I could have a kid. I'm going, oh, actually, you're absolutely right. So bringing the spectrum in and how they feel in relation to where they are in the spectrum was also very important.
It's interesting what you share just now about, child-free versus childless and just categories in general, because what I've learned, even helping people answer this question, do I want to have kids or stay child-free, that it's so much more complex than that. I have women who have, for example, gone through my group program who have been doing infertility treatments for years. And there's, at this point, low likelihood that they will be able to have a child. And the question is like, do I continue, or knowing that things are as they are, would I like to essentially being proactive as far as, or being an agent in their own life to say, yes, these are the circumstances that I find myself in or that life has handed me. And yet I am choosing to move towards being child-free rather than feeling like I've been left in this childless lot, if you will. And again, of course it can be both. It's not about deciding, but it's just really interesting that, for others, it's like maybe they find themselves without a partner and they had imagined if they had a child, they would be in a partner relationship. And so perhaps they choose the child-free path, or maybe they're considering choosing single motherhood. But it's like there's this factor of it's not entirely within their control or their choice, and yet they're looking at what control or say do I have in this matter. So it's really interesting. Even again, you kind of think, oh, it would be more clear cut. Maybe you wouldn't think that because we know life's never straightforward. But even amongst people who are making this decision, oftentimes there are circumstances that they found themselves in that gives them less say than they initially would have hoped for, or perhaps had should life have been different.
Yeah, and in the beginning of their journey, they might have the choice. Later on, they might not have, or it could
Yeah.
be the other way around. There are several stories in the book like that. People who chose to have an abortion, but then later on are wondering, I could, maybe I still be a mother. I'm open to that. So, yeah, it's absolutely not clear cut, and
Mm.
I have a hard time when members of our own community get so attached to the wordings. I
Yeah.
think you can use whatever you want that reflects your own story and where you are in relation to your story. Absolutely, what you use in relation to yourself is none of my concern. Is when
Hmm.
we decide that others have to start calling themselves one
Yeah.
thing or the other. That's usually when I'm no longer interested in the conversation,
Yeah.
because you don't know how other people feel or the full extent of their circumstances or the reasons for their choice. And then you go, no, but in this case, you're child free. No, no, then in this case, because then you're
Yeah.
childless. And this is only for childless people. And this is only for child free people. I think you're really excluding a bunch of people who are still one figuring it out or who are
Hmm.
moving from one place to another and might feel displaced at some point, because then
Yeah.
should I move to this other community that has a different name now that I moved a
Yeah.
little bit ahead in my journey? Um, I,
Totally.
I wanted the bridge. I didn't want the walls.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm grateful you've created that bridge. And I do have to say, I feel like we're seeing perhaps a bit more movement towards inclusivity, at least amongst, and maybe it's just the people in the communities and social media accounts I try and surround myself with, but where there is more acknowledgement of the complexity of this, decision or choice or circumstance that we find ourselves in. And that despite our differences, we ultimately do share similarities with one another, and that we can come together and also be able to learn from each other's differences and challenges and have empathy and understanding. It's like we don't all want to be that exact same person. That's boring.
No,
why
yeah.
should we be? And
No, and also real life, right? You could be
yeah.
on a bus. We're all going towards not having kids, but it doesn't mean we're all the same. And the
Yeah.
problem I have with the classification or with the imposition of classification on others,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's not the usage, it's how you impose,
Yeah.
is we don't do that to mothers. We don't say, oh, did you choose to be a mother? You sit here. Are you a regretted mother? You
Yeah.
sit there. Did you become a mother by accident? Oh, actually, no, you go sit in the corner. Like, we don't do
Yeah.
that. So for me, I wasn't, in the beginning, I was out of isolation and feeling like I need somebody who also chose to be my friend.
Yeah.
But after a while, I was just interested in people, whoever they are. And to be honest, some of them are people who could be very close friends. Others are people who are lovely people, but who I didn't necessarily connect with on a
Yeah.
personal level. So again, it's just to show it's not because you don't have a child that you would necessarily be somebody with whom I would connect with. Just like there are some others with whom I'm very connected. So yeah, similarities and differences. That it really is the whole point. If we want to show who we really are within this group, I think we have to bring all the layers, all the textures, and not just pick and choose what we want.
Yeah. I totally agree. Now, despite knowing there are a lot of differences and that it's, colorful and diverse, and we've got all these different lived experiences and voices and ages, and would you say, and the answer of course can be no, but like, was there any through line as far as conclusions you might be able to draw about women without kids? Or is it just like, no, I couldn't even say that for, 9 times out of 10, this is what I find these people to be?
No, there isn't. And there is a reason why the book doesn't have a well wrapped here in 10
Tied up with
days
a
I
bow, sort
learned.
of.
No. And those are decisions that I made editorially in relation to the book.
Yeah.
I can remember one of the people who were interested in the book, now my current publisher, they are perfect. But
Mm-hmm.
it was basically, why don't you write the things that you learn with the women? And I'm going, this is not a prescriptive book. I don't want to tell
Yeah.
people what I learned, because what I learned is only in relation to my own experience. And what you might get from it is very
Yeah.
different than what I get. And when I decided to put their own voices on the page instead of
Mm.
quotes, that was my way to let go of the learnings. I know what I learned from it, but I don't necessarily feel the need to share, because that what I see there is in relation to my culture, to my religious beliefs, to my health, and to dynamics of my romantic relationship. I'm seeing things in a way that somebody else might not. And by also saying these are my learnings, I also feel like I might not be making space for other learnings, for other ways of interpreting the book. One of the things that has been the most interesting, most beautiful about having the book in the world in the past 2 weeks, but even through beta reading phase in the past 3 months, was sometimes people would say, oh, that story made me think blah, blah, blah. And I would go, wow, I never thought about that. And I was sitting in the room with that person for 4 hours. So I don't want to reduce the book to a couple bullet points. And I am actually very glad that I don't want, but also I don't know that I can do it, because it really means that there is enough difference and there is enough diversity in there to prove the point of stop putting us in a corner. We don't all fit there. The one thing I would say that they all have in common in their own way is the pursuit for a joyful life, whatever that looks like to them. Sometimes it's through careers, sometimes it's through connecting with friends, through community work, through centering their partner, that becoming the center of their lives. Others is to exploring the world or nature. They all seem to be very adamant about, this is not the most important thing about me. Not having a child is not the most important, not even the most interesting thing about me, but it's also not going to be the black hole that's going to swallow me. I never met anybody who was like, I don't care in the end. They all care, but they care in different ways.
Yeah. Well said. It's interesting you're talking about this identity piece of being child-free or childless or what have you. And I agree with you. It's important for people to feel seen, which you obviously know. I mean, you wanted to feel seen and have your own desires or lack of desires validated or seen out in the world. But at the same time, it really is so minor compared to all those other things that create, at least for me, the person that I am. And I don't want to take that away from anyone who says, well, no, my child-free identity is like that is who I am. And that's such a big part of it. But I've had to reflect, for me, doing this work and of course, talking about my experiences of being child-free and helping people find their decision, whatever that may be. Of course, for many, it's parenthood. It's interesting to think, now that I've made my decision, how often I would actually think about and reflect on it if I wasn't thinking about it and reflecting on it every day by merit of the fact that I'm doing this work. Like I confront it all the time just because I'm talking and thinking about it. But I think otherwise I'd just be, I don't know, doing my job and doing my hikes and all those other things which I still do. But it's interesting. I'm curious for you, like you must, even though it's such a small part of you in some sense, I mean, it obviously also has shaped you in your life. Like, because you've written this book, you must think about your identity a lot, or?
I did a lot while I was writing it, and I think it extended it to longer than it would have happened if I were not engaging with the book. Because obviously every time I had a new interview, I would come back home with all of those thoughts and a different way of thinking about it, or just trying to put myself in the place of that person, or seeing the similarities or seeing the differences. So in many ways it extended my search for a final answer. And at some point in the book I will mention that there was good in looking and listening to all of these other ways of living within the realm of not having kids, but it also kept me there longer than I would have wanted. And at some point I had to say, okay, enough. Like I acknowledge this part of me. I'm happy I could make the choice. I'm respectful and grateful for everybody who spoke to me about it, but I'm ready to spend more energy on the other parts of my life. And I think if you want to make your whole life about that, it's your prerogative. But I didn't feel like I needed to give more time to that. I'm quite pleased with the fact that now it's in the world, and it's hopefully there for other people who still would like some tool or some kind of map into how self-reflect. I hope that will help others. But I made peace with my decision, and I'm ready to really enjoy other bits of myself. I think my
I'd
next
love
book would
to.
be the other parts of me.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. Maybe perhaps you can just share a little bit about some of the other parts of you, because you're so much more or broader than this child-free woman who's written this book. So tell us a little bit that you might want to share, or what you're excited to delve into.
Well, I've always written, and it's been my identity for the longest time, both as a technical writer in the corporate world, but also hundreds and hundreds of poems and essays and short stories. I have drafts of books in my folders about completely different topics. And in a way, while it's been a wonderful journey to have my first book be about something that is so connected to my heart and directly connected to my life. I'm actually looking forward to seeing what kind of writer I can be outside of that topic. And also when I'm not carrying the weight of other people's stories or not writing about something that is so personal. Like, I don't know who that writer is. I mean, I do have drafts, so I have a sense, but it's different when you know you're going to get it published. You edit it in a different way emotionally. There is a huge difference between, look, there are 100 pages I wrote that is just in my computer, and there are 100 pages I wrote that are going out for somebody else to read. It does something to your brain and to your body, the level of stress and the anticipation, and also the skills that you have to really bring to the forefront of your routine to be able to own that work. So I'm excited about it. I'm curious about it. I'm a poet for over 25 years. I love essays, so I'm looking forward to writing more essays. I'm really excited about delving into fiction. And so, it's just a tiny bit of me that wrote about that. But then there are all of these skills like content curation, finding women. I always wanted to become a biographer. There's a reason why Molly Peacock is my mentor. She's a poet and a biographer. So,
so cool.
I see like a bridge to a future self. And there is a part of me that is just really looking forward to looking at all of those books that are here on my shelf and going, oh, I'm not going to read about childlessness anymore. Like, I don't have to. This is my contribution to the world. I've done this for 14 years. What I learned is now there, and I hope it will help others. But maybe I want to read about menopause and, female bodies and what happens to you when you grow older as a woman. There are other topics that I'm interested in and looking forward to exploring.
I'm interested to see what you have to share on those topics, because those are also things on my mind. And, part of it is by merit of the fact we're women in our early 40s who are curious. Similar to some of what you share with regards to health issues in the book, I've dealt with similar things. So I definitely see, again, some parallels between our stories. And I know that people listening or people reading the book specifically will, I think what you share will really resonate with them. And I don't have this feeling of like, oh no, just only write about this one thing. I would love to read a fiction book by you, because I think, you're just such a beautiful prosaic, I don't know if that's the right word, but it feels like it fits, writer. Prosaic, is that?
I'll take that. I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to just touch on, you mentioned Molly Peacock. I'd be curious if you could just give a little bit of voice to your relationship with her. For those who don't know, just, who is she, and what role has this relationship played in your life, both with regards to your writing and also, if my understanding is correct, she also is a woman without children.
Yes.
Is that correct?
She is,
yeah.
Yes.
And she's older as well, which we talked about this need or importance for you. And I feel very much the same way, to have these older sort of like role models or mentors who are without children.
Yeah, Molly is such a gift. So her name is Molly Peacock. She's American Canadian. So was born in the US, but lives in Canada for decades. So she has double citizenship. Molly is mostly or primarily a poet. In the beginning of her career, that's what she did the most. She became the president of the Poetry Society in America.
Interesting.
She's one of the founders, or the founder of poems in the Metro in New York. So she has all of these creative ways of putting poetry out there. Then at some point, she became a biographer. She wrote about Mary Delaney, an artist from the 1700s. Then she wrote about Mary Hister Reid, who is a painter in the 1800s. Both didn't have children. Beautiful, beautiful biographies. One of them is called The Paper Garden. So if you just type Molly Peacock, you'll find 7 collections of poetry, and you will find they're all amazing. I have all of them here. And then you will find 2 biographies. So I read a book called Paradise Piece by Piece, which I found in a library in Sweden, in Malmo, in my second year of research for Others Like Me. And it was a book she wrote in the 90s. She had, I think, just turned 50. It was late 40s, early 50s. And becoming a mother was no longer a possibility. She had chosen, but also just biologically, she was like, it's not going to happen. So she wrote about her pursuit of creativity her whole life, how she always knew she would be a poet, and how she never let anything get in the way of that. And that included, a lot of abuse as a child, an alcoholic father, relationships that didn't work well, extreme poverty. And she managed to keep working as a poet, even sometimes as her second or third job. And there was something about that drive and that resilience.
Wow. That is so cool. And I have to say, so for me in my child-free journey, if you will, I felt and continue to feel this sort of increasing importance of having connections with women without kids who are older, because similarly, I feel very good and I feel much more optimistic about my future than the past. But specifically when I was grappling with this issue, I felt like you say, very few models of people who've lived the better part of their lives or their entire lives without kids. And I have come to become acquainted with some women in their 70s who don't have children through doing this work and events that I've hosted and the podcast. And it brings me so much comfort and solace, and not just from that aspect of them not having kids, but I think, probably when we're younger, we tend to be a little bit sort of, insular, just looking at our own peer group and what we have going on in our own lives. But I feel like there's so much wisdom to be gleaned and also shared from ourselves as well to older generations, that these sort of intergenerational relationships, not just when without kids, but in general, I can see them really having more and more importance in my life. And also being a woman without children, wanting to keep connections with people who are younger than me as well. And so I'm curious to know, do you have any suggestions or advice in terms of if people want to cultivate those relationships with people who are maybe outside the scope of who they're meeting on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, for me, meetup groups were a huge revelation. I still am part of one here called Sisterhood Childfree in Dublin. It's 1,300 members in Dublin. Yeah, so within the group, there are very different types of activities. So there are book clubs, that are arts events. Another group is more into yoga and meeting in the park. Others are more like night people. Let's go to a pub, have a pint. So even within the group that is just really for women without children, they will find their own hobbies and interests. So I would say if you feel comfortable meeting new people, that is a good way to do it. Yeah. If you're a bit more introvert and don't feel so comfortable just kind of showing up to events, I always make a point of writing to people whose work touched me somehow. It could be a post on Instagram and you write privately to that person, letting them know how it felt and how important that was to you. It could be a movie, it could be a photograph exhibition, it could be somebody on Women's Hour who gave an interview, and then you can just write to them, and you'll be surprised how connections can form. I'm in that age now, which is basically like this mid ground where I both connect with women who are older than me, but also women in their 20s are writing to me a lot, especially in the past 3-4 years, because I also have a blog, and they used to contact me a lot for that. And there was the sense of am I becoming a Molly, because I already had so many blog posts and so many collections. And so they would say, I'm 21, I'm 22. And I'm thinking, my God, it's 20 years difference now, and so it's been really nice as well to to be in a position where hopefully I can also lend a hand and not just request from somebody else. So read books, look for movies, find the creators, say thank you, say hello, say I appreciate you. Good luck. There are so many of us there wanting to be found, wanting to be seen.
Yeah.
And wanting to also, it's both ways. Every time somebody finds you, you're also happy that there is somebody else that found you,
100%. Yeah. I know for me, it always means so much when people reach out and say how the work I'm doing has impacted them. And I'm always happy to connect or be asked a question or have some sort of dialogue. And I agree. I think we are in this beautiful position where it can and does go both ways. And I want to be able to, I'm similar to yourself where you're thinking somebody in their early 20s, that's 20 years difference. It doesn't feel like it, but even with some recent women I've become friends with who are, let's say, in their early to mid 30s. So not even that much younger than me, but they're still grappling with this question.
Yes.
I just am happy to be able to serve as a model of someone who has chosen not to have children, which doesn't mean that should be their decision. But I think it's so important that we are able to be seen, living our lives, pursuing joy, as you say. And I also agree with you. I think people appreciate and they want the acknowledgement. And a lot of, I think, not all of us, but as we get older, that it becomes increasingly important to feel like we have given back and that we are contributing. We want to do that. And so I know for me, having asked people to speak on the podcast or take part in events or, support with whatever, there's just so much willingness and openness to do that, which is incredible. So I hope to be able to do the same. And if if we're becoming elders, Nicole, I guess. Here for it.
Well, I'm very happy about that, to be honest. Very happy to be in that position. I also think getting older, it just really means we're still alive and we still have a chance at getting things right and getting better. So I'm enjoying the ride now. It's much less lonely, much less confusing, much less isolating. And then again, being able to listen to your voice and other voices and not just somebody else's is such a special place to be.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Where can people find you? Where can they find your book? What are all the things they need to know?
Right. So Others Like Me, The Lives of Women Without Children is out in Europe. You will find it in bookstores in the UK and in Ireland. Otherwise, you'll find it online. If you live elsewhere, it is already available online. You just have to pay a little bit more for shipping. You will find me on Instagram and on Twitter. My handle is by Nicole Louie. And there in those profiles, you'll find the link. Otherwise, you just type the name of the book. It is on Amazon. It is on bookshop.org. It's in a bunch of European online shops. So just type Others Like Me by Nicole Louie. And if there's anything you heard here today that you'd like to discuss further, or if you just want to say hi, do start following me, send me a direct message. I'm very open to having conversations. This is how I got here, and it would be lovely to hear from you.
Wonderful. Well, we will make sure to include your handles and all those links in the show notes of today's episode. I thank you for coming on for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for writing this book. I want everyone who's listening, the next thing you do, there probably will be instructions saying review the podcast. You can skip it today. The next thing I want you to do is go order a copy of Nicole's book. You won't regret doing so. Buy 2 copies, gift it to someone you love, and enjoy reading it. So thank you.
Keltie, thank you. Thank you so much for this lovely, lovely conversation.
Thank you for tuning in for this episode of the Kids or Childfree podcast. Now, I have a few new goodies for you over on the free resources page, which you'll find at kidsorchildfree.com. I will also link to this in today's show notes. And the new resources that I've added are a podcast episode, a secret podcast episode, if you will. It's a recording that I made prior to launching the Kids or Childfree podcast. And it's actually a very personal share of mine related to a situation that happened with a friend of mine. And it really talks about how triggering this kids or child-free decision can be. It's vulnerable. There may or may not be a few tears shed. And it's available exclusively when you head to the free resources page and sign up for it at kidsorchildfree.com. The other resource I recently added is the replay of the event we had earlier in the spring, which was the Between Friends conversation I had with my friend Lauren Grant, who is a filmmaker. She is a mom. And we talked all about how we've maintained our friendship throughout all the ups and downs that motherhood and this decision that I've made has brought. We talk about how you personally can navigate some of the concerns and the challenges that you might be having in your friendships when one of you has kids and the other one doesn't. Again, check it out. That's at kidsyourchildfree.com under the free resources tab. Thank you again for listening today, and we'll see you back here soon for another episode of the Kids Are Child Free podcast.